After hearing about those problems, I feel like either I was put here because misery loves company, or as comic relief. Not exactly sure. But I would like to take the next few minutes to tell you about the Digital Humanities Project that didn't begin as a Digital Humanities Project, and how it became a Digital Humanities Project, and down to work we go. It's a project that is centered around a particular genre of Kabbalistic creativity. I'm not sure if everybody in the room knows anything about Kabbalah, even though there is a Kabbalah network on cable TV here, but I think if you have watched it, then I can be certain that you don't know anything about Kabbalah. So here's the one paragraph summary. It's an esoteric tradition that images God in terms of 10 powers called sfirot. They're described often in the scholarly literature as hypostatic, a word that is used by Christians in the Christian tradition with regard to the Trinity. Basically means in the Christian tradition that even though there are 3, there are 1. In the Kabbalistic tradition, even though there are 10, there is one God. So there are these 10 sfirot, and there's a kind of theurgic presumption that human behavior has an impact on the Godhead that is imaged in terms of these 10 sfirot. So you do good things and the cosmos benefits, and I'm sure none of you would do anything that wasn't good, so I won't go to the other possible scenario. Now, the thing that you need to know about Kabbalah with regard to this particular project is that Kabbalistic discourse is not something that would seem, well, expected if you are used to most so-called mystical traditions. Doesn't speak very much about the subjective experience of the devotee, but much more takes an objectivistic stance and describes the structure of the Godhead with in a kind of scientific sounding discourse that actually was presumed for the better part of the last millennium to be a kind of divine science that was very highly regarded even in the scientific circles of its day in various periods, of course. So the Godhead is imaged as 10 sfirot. This structured Godhead is described with a kind of objective tone in Kabbalistic sources, and Kabbalists want to know how is this structure actually arrayed, and what is the real topography of the divine. So from the beginnings of Kabbalah, Kabbalists made diagrams, and many of those diagrams attempt to present the graphical image of the Godhead, a kind of map of God. In the 14th century, Kabbalists developed a genre that's specific to this kind of work, I don't know what to call it, and that genre is called Ilanot, and Ilanot are at the heart of our work. And when I say our, I haven't said yet much. I didn't even say, hi, I'm Yossi, but hi, I'm Yossi. And Eliezer, you all probably know, Eliezer and I work together, and have worked together now for some years on this material, even before it was a digital humanities project. So, again, around the 14th century, Kabbalists begin taking sheets of parchment and putting diagrammatic representations of the Godhead on the parchment. And they used to call them yeriot, or sheets of parchment. Sometime probably in the 15th century, they became known as Ilanot, which is the Hebrew word for trees. Ilan is a tree, Ilanot, plural. And you've just seen, this is the kind of generic definition given by Moses Cordovero, the leading Kabbalist of the mid-16th century here in the local Galilean environment and spot, saying when the Kabbalists drew certain forms of the Godhead on parchment sheets, they called them Ilan. That's a very early one you see in the background. That is very slightly later, and more colorful version, but these are classical Ilanot, and some of them, these are from a later period. Basically, Kabbalists from the 14th century to the present have made these kinds of maps of God. This is also, actually I can show this to you in two different ways. Around 1500 in northern Italy, a Kabbalist made the most ambitious of the map, the most ambitious Ilan that had thus far been attempted, stitching together a number of sheets and then creating a map roughly 1 meter wide by some 3 meters in length. And if I can get a little help from my friend.
Yeah, we would be of 2 hours.
This is a roughly accurately sized facsimile of one of the a witness from the manuscript family that we are now working on in the first phase of our Digital Humanities project. I'd love to actually leave it open or accessible, but I'm gonna now do a segue to something just slightly different. Okay, so to get to the Digital Humanities bit, first of all, roughly a decade ago, when I started working on it, just some years before Eliezer began collaborating with me, I just started with manuscripts. There were a lot of them, mostly unknown, uncatalogued. When they were cataloged unhelpfully, as is true of so many visual artifacts. Art historians know this very well, also historians of science who are curious about scientific images in manuscript, and then as well as in printed scientific works. So relatively early on, it became clear that we had to start making a catalog. I had a postdoc working with me before Eliezer, and then Eliezer started probably 8 years ago at least, right? I don't know, something like that. We began working on just a database that we kept on our own computer, and mostly to keep track of what we had seen and to provide some initial comments and descriptions of these manuscripts. In 2012, we began working together with the fine folks at the University of Haifa's library to create the first iteration of our online Ilanot database. And of course, I take every opportunity to thank the library, and the library started working with us at this time, Nomi and Ora, and their staff in an incredible way. And as I'll mention in just a few minutes, the transition to digital humanities and our current initiative was kind of midwifed as well by the very same partners in the library. When we began this DigiTool database, which I think is still up and running, we had about 250 items. I should mention that because these long parchments, large parchments, have many diagrammatic elements that didn't show up for the very first time in those artifacts, we quickly expanded our purview, at least in terms of cataloging and creating a database, to include diagrams in Kabbalistic codices as well. So I would say about 20% of what's in the database is, well, properly speaking, Ilanot, and 80% diagrammatic material, visual material from Kabbalistic codices. Today we have about 700 artifacts cataloged on the one hand, but it is also true that we've become more selective about our cataloging, because if there are 200 manuscripts of some Kabbalistic work, and they all have a diagram in it, we don't make 200 catalog entries for it, because we're not trying to be... We have great aspirations. It's already 700 or 800 years of material from everywhere in the Jewish world. I think, to include every diagram would be even a bit much for the 2 or 3 of us that are working at any given time. You can see that if you now would do a search for diagrams from 16th century Italy or from 19th century Kurdistan, or diagram, Kabbalistic visual material that shows a particular concept, Ein Sof, the infinite God, or the Ptolemaic concentric circles, or whatever you're looking for, you could get results like this even today. Sometimes you see a thumbnail, sometimes you don't. Unless it's a glitch in the system, it means that either we don't have the image or we don't have permission to include the image in the results. If you click on one of the results, you get something that looks like this, which you can't really read from where you're sitting, but it's basically links to, when they exist, to the National Library's catalog entry on the manuscript. It includes other relevant metadata. Here I can manage to read period, material description, and provenance, and some, perhaps, well, this is even hard for me to read. But in any case, this is the metadata. If you were looking for images of Ein Sof, very nice, you might hit this and know that somewhere in this artifact there's a visualization of Ein Sof, in the infinite. Now, this brings me to stepping up our digital humanities game, which I could say resulted from our efforts. Let me start again. Our efforts over a half dozen years became increasingly rigorous as we developed a standard lexicon of descriptive terminology, metadata, to tag each manuscript in the database, so that people could search for Ilanot, in which particular ideas were visualized, or in which there could be found certain schemata or iconographical elements or visual materials from certain times and places. But then it became clear, especially with regard to the visualization of certain ideas or iconographical elements, it became clear that, especially in our Ilanot, properly speaking, those large parchments, some of which go on for meters, doesn't really help you that much to discover that if something is visualized somewhere on a map. Imagine you had a giant map of Los Angeles, like the Thomas's Guide, like a real, and they said, yes, in that map there is, Gulfview Drive Road or whatever, and it doesn't help you. You need to know where it is on the map. It's not enough to know that the map contains that. So, as I was saying a few moments ago, and you saw here on the facsimile, and I'll say a bit more about this later, we've started working in this new system that I haven't yet described on this family, which has, this is sampling of the complete and fragmentary witnesses of this family of Ilanot. So let me give you just a quick example. How I'm interested in the visualization of Ein Sof, which is, let's just say, I'll put it from the other direction. Here I'm really getting ahead of myself, but what can I do? I'm preparing an edition of this, and I have to choose one of these. And it so happens that I choose one in which there is a variant in the iconography and a variant in the visualization of the Kabbalistic idea. So for example, in a JTS manuscript, Ein Sof is visualized in this area that's connected to a crown that's sitting on the top of the 10th sphira, known as Keter or crown. And that is how Ein Sof is figured in the JTS manuscript. But in all of the other manuscripts, it's figured inside an image of the eye. The font, the source of all of reality is considered or is visualized as the kind of streaming eye of the infinite God. So here I'm basically saying two things at once. We want to be able to, we realize that the metadata has to be connected to the image itself. And we wanted to be able to have a system in which we could allow people to see graphical variants no less than textual variants in these artifacts. So it turns out that when you take an Ilan and you start working on embedding the metadata in the image of the Ilan, you effectively create a digital edition or a digital critical edition of that Ilan. So, and in the making of this digital edition, you have to make each element discrete, whether it's iconographic, diagrammatic, or textual. You have to isolate it. You have to identify its content. You have to tag it. And if it's a text, transcribe it and translate it. The convergence of embedding metadata and creating digital editions of Ilanot was especially fortuitous because it solves a basic problem that we faced since beginning our work on this genre, which was how do you create a critical edition? Not that anybody in their right mind in today's academic world would want to create a critical edition, but I mean if they want to get promoted or something silly like that. But for those of us who still do silly things, how would you make a critical edition of a scroll that goes on for meters? That's an iconotext. In other words, it's a work in which the graphical and textual elements are inseparable. It would be terrible violence to the artifact to start chopping it up and presenting it as a book, even a nice coffee table book. So it's much better to create a scrollable, interactive critical edition using the technologies that we're now developing. So in short, our vision has gradually become the development of a platform for research-oriented digital critical editions of Ilanot that will also be linked closely to our upgraded University of Haifa Ilanot database, which is now transitioning or has already transitioned to Alma from DigiTool. So where are we right now in the process? About a year and a half ago, thanks to Daria Connections, Nomi and Ora from the library hooked us up with Dr. Jan Baraze, who's in Göttingen University's Digital Humanities Lab. Together we put in an application for a Volkswagen Stiftung grant for such collaborations between Israeli and German teams, won the grant, and started working on it early in 2019. The German team just came here in February, and we'll be going there in the summer. And as you know already, they suggested that we work with a complex artifact to begin with, because we're developing the infrastructure that will allow us to deal with anything. And anything that, if we can do it on this, we'll be able to do it with anything else. So a little bit about the technical side of things. So this is just an early visualization of how the workflow proceeds. We have to start with a digital image. We got to get a good scan. It's really hard to get a good scan, but I won't bore you with that. But to get a library to film something and get it so that it is up to the requirements of our work is no simple feat. But once we have done that, it's our first task to outline every distinct zone in the Ilan, visual and textual, of course. And this has proven to be both conceptually and technologically more challenging than one might think. It's not always obvious what a zone is. There are discrete parts within greater holes, and so forth. I have here just for the techies in the room, you can, if you want, read a little bit in the background while I'm chatting about the system that we're using as at the moment to do this first level work of tagging the zones. Actually, I'm not sure if I want to even slow down on this. May be better just to show you rather than bore you with that. Well, maybe it wouldn't bore everybody here, but I'm already bored just looking at it. So this is actually how it looks, that thing that was just written about, white on black. This is the new Trivia image annotator that is being deployed. You can see that it has a number of tools. They did not exist in the current version of TextGrid, so it was necessary for the Göttingen team to adopt this as a kind of module from an Oxford project and link it to our project, which otherwise lives in TextGrid. I was about to say that as soon as we identify a zone, we have to give it a name, and to give it a name, we need to have an ontology. And that's, for those of you who come from philosophy, that's not what I mean. So this is we had to create a relational language to describe everything you can see on an Ilan. So at this point, using the first iteration of our ontology, we're already clicking on a zone and using a menu to select from the ontology what will the name of the zone. So it's a descriptive lexicon in which every term is relationally situated. And I'll show you, well, so you can see that, and you can see also the zone editors where we're able to create a kind of hierarchy of these zones, because we may have a spherotic tree that has 10 spherot in it, and we want to be able to give a sense also of the hierarchy of these things within the map, and that's part of the ontology. So now, okay, and this is more on the ontology, again, text that I won't have time to read with you, but I do want to show you this visualization of the ontology.
Which gives a new Ilan.
This is one of the fun things of creating.
Now the whole thing makes sense.
Right now. So, I know it's a little hard to read, so I did a kind of presification of my keynote. So you have these features, the things that you see. You can say, oh, it's a sphera, it's a channel, a rainbow, temple. You can see that we're trying to establish the relationships between all these possible iconographic, morphological, ideational systems. And how do they all fit together? Here's some Luriana Kabbalah creeping in here on the upper left side. Okay, so, יש לי עוד 3 דקות. Okay, so, anyway, okay, so everything that we're doing from the putting that picture in of the Ilan, to marking of the zones, to putting in the XML files of the translations, the transcription, commentary, the links to the database, everything is happening within TextGrid. That's what's connecting and linking all of these layers of information. TextGrid is also good for us, we hope at least. We're not very far into it, but we hope that we'll also be able to exploit some of its functionality down the line. It has a lot of capacities in terms of producing different kinds of published editions of the work that we're doing. We have to, of course, also create a TEI header file with descriptive metadata for each of the Ilanot. And we also have, okay, more things that I won't bore you with. But I didn't say anything about crowdsourcing, and so I'm sorry. But I do want to say, at least, that we're thinking about it. And as you might imagine, the most tedious in terms of hours of work required, the most tedious point in this process is probably establishing the zones in these artifacts, saying, okay, this is a discrete text, this is a discrete iconographical element. Everything has to be, okay. So, doing this outlining of shapes. TextGrid, when we began the project just a few months ago, didn't even have a circle tool that we could use. They told us you're going to have to take your mouse and start making clicking around every shape that you want to identify. And I already put in a claim for repetitive stress syndrome, and I said I'm retiring now. I'm not. No way. So that, to a certain extent, that was behind finding a module from some other project that had better tools. So okay, we have better tools now, fair enough, but still it's a lot of hours. Our first thought in terms of crowdsourcing is, can we get people interested in these artifacts and engaging with them in order to bring them to help us with some of this work of establishing what is each and every discrete zone in the Elan. Of course, we don't know, how it's a lot of open questions. How much knowledge of Kabbalah do you need to know to do this? Is it enough to tell people? It's just like a reverse coloring book. You're just outline everything and then let us worry about it later. Well, you're creating you're just tracing. No thinking, just tracing. Of course, coloring books are very popular now. I even saw in the App Store of the iPad, there's a coloring book where you don't even have to choose the colors anymore. You just have to, I guess people just want to move the mouse or something, I don't know. But the reverse coloring book could be something that people would be interested in as a form of kind of Kabbalistic meditation. So we have some thoughts. We certainly have the need. Interestingly enough, from a kind of purely financial point of view, crowdsourcing wasn't mentioned as part of our initial grant, which anyway is just barely enough to get us to a kind of first iteration of this platform. So we have to contend with the fact that it's neither budgeted at the moment, nor is the German team feeling like it has a lot of extra people and hours to throw at this problem. So the silver lining is this may bring us back to the possibility of closer collaboration with local partners, such as the Elijah Lab. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. And I have a thank you slide. Thank you. This is the Germans and us, and the library folks.
So, our chair had to go teaching, and so I think we'll take just 2 questions because we have to rush to the post session.
Thanks for the interesting talk. Just a small technical question. I really love the big graph that you've shown. Which tool did you use to draw it?
You're speaking about the mind
The
map?
ontology?
The ontology mind map?
Yeah.
Oh, that was done by one of our German partners. Do you know which tool he used?
Hand.
He did it by hand, yes.
Yeah.
He told you that he did it by hand?
I think it's the dot. It's a standard tool that you use to draw stuff in computers.
Okay.
What is the tool?
It's called dot.
Dot.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question? Okay, so thank you everyone. You have a question? Please do.
Still not too late.
Please.
A very short one. The annotation platform that you have there, which contains everything, all the annotations, because it could be very useful for training the layout analysis methods.
We use something very similar actually. It's called Label Me. It works better than Maya for really large images.
Yes, but this data is also very interesting to train.
Yes, of course you could use it to train. So, yeah.
You're talking about train to identify zones or train to
Layout analysis.
read the text?
No.
Layout
No,
analysis.
Layout
you can do,
analysis.
yes, pixel labeling, semantic segmentation, really.
Mhm.
Yes, you can do it.
And you, Eliezer, you noted the name of the. Okay. Yes.
It was sort of a snarky question, but there's so much detail in these documents, and they're so gigantic.
Yes.
How do you decide how many pixels are necessary to represent the infinite?
I mean, it is a good question. We actually did just have a very arduous back and forth with Oxford to obtain the images that we'll use to create the edition of this. Ilan, I mean, basically, thus far I've just tried to make sure I get an image that I can magnify enough to the point of readability.
Yeah.
I don't think that we need to be concerned about going, to like some futuristic detective show where there's going to be a pixel that's going to break the case for us.
Yeah, right.
But of course, the idea is to be able to zoom effectively to relatively small details, and you're absolutely right. The details here are staggering. I should mention too, it's a 33,000 word text that has never been studied either until now.
Wow.
And
Is it possible to combine
the variants?
no, the picture of the picture, these three pictures?
Oh, yeah, okay, it's true. Most of these things are not photographed in one shot. So we have to stitch them together, which I've always done, but now the Germans want it done better. And of course, every time they move the Ilan to take the picture, they don't keep everything exactly the same. So it's a challenge, yeah. But we'll get through it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Yossi. Thank you all the speakers of this session. Thank you all the speakers of the entire conference. And thank you for all the members of the Elijah Lab team that took part in preparation and in the day. Thank you for the guests from abroad. Thank you, Eilnot. Without you, this conference wouldn't exist at all. Yeah.
זו רוח הקבלה, אז אם כל אחד יוכל את הכוס שלו לזרוק כדי שלא נהיה לא נחמדים למנחות, זה מה שחשוב לי.
So in the spirit of Kabbalah, everyone is asked to take his glass or to the bin, so the cleaning ladies won't have so much work. And Nat will guide us. Do you know where are we? Oh, we are going now to the education building. Whoever is joining us to the poster session in the education building, it won't be very long, and then those who are joining for the dinner will be taken by taxis.
From Cortes.
Which university?
University of Maryland, born in Mallorca.
He was born in Mallorca?
Yes. He is cataloger at the University of Maryland. But he is who can add, could bring content to the Library of Congress. And he also works on a digital clip, because in the United States, as you know, we're very, very, very digital. But his name is
I was born in Mallorca. What a coincidence. But
If you go on Facebook, he is at, because there was a conference last week.
Where?
In and about something. So he's in New York. He will be around next week.
Repeat the name.
Yes. As you know, you have to have
right there.
was
Never been
right there.
there.
Manel. You don't go right away.
ומה הבעיה?
No, he's in the United States. He's in New York.
מה? אני לא שומעת אותך טוב.
He's also a Kazakh. His doctor is from the University of Girona.
לא, אני, עכשיו יש פה איזה פוסטרים, זה גדול, זה 20 דקות, אני אצא פה 6:30, אני אבוא, אני אבוא אלייך, אני יכולה להיכנס או שמה? בסדר, ייקח לי עוד איזה שעה להגיע, נו. אבל אם ייתנו לי להיכנס או מה לעשות? בסדר, אז אני אתקשר אליך כשאני יוצאת מפה. רגע, אז לא סידרתי.
Only knew when you said that day. Sorry.
No worries, it was a great presentation. Thank you so much. I just
something to drink, it's like a tile.
maybe you're one of those neat lines.
Exactly. It's sort of like when someone's big music getting 1 terabyte file.
And the digital projects. Somewhere reduced resolution.
You've got to align the pins of the geometry to all of
we're talking about Wikipedia with data, and I also have a slide about the connection of the studio with Wikipedia. And it's, you know, such a small world.
Yeah, even more because we are part of the time machine.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it's part of the time machine. And the Netherlands, there are also the Amsterdam ones that were also. I mean,
yeah, so you know, it's like we can't just now you're like, you know, we can just start opening. It's going to be all over again.
Yeah, and create a local time machine. Yeah, this is the other thing. Because we are more than 200 partners, but there are not 200 local time machines.
No.
So just create a local time machine.
But we started.
It means this, you know. So you finished the project from the beginning. Like, we joined the time machine. We joined the time machine 1 year.
Please do come. We're going to the first session.
But in Amsterdam, it was the first time you were in the meeting because I was in selling mail.
I was in Nuremberg. Were you in Nuremberg?
No, I was in Brussels.
It's
It's generic. It's been on it here for 8 years. Yeah. No, it's big fan.
You remember the generic name?
Generic name is Attent. A-T-T-E-N-T. It's wonderful. 3 of my kids are on it too. Wow. Yeah. 18.